Bruce Nesmith, and I'm going to be talking about Skyrim's Radiant Story System. So before I get going real quick, how many of you here in this room, and I can see about half the room, are aspiring game developers or in some sort of educational program to become game developers? You see a show of hands? Okay, a few of you. This talk is going to, on occasion, get a little bit technical. If that's not your thing, don't sweat it. Just tune it out and come back to attention when things get more interesting for you. But we do have a little bit of technical stuff for those people who are students. And without further ado, I'm going to share my screen and start my presentation. Right there. There we go. Okay, so we're here to talk about the story of Radiant Story. Just a teeny bit about myself first. I served as the lead designer for the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim. I also worked on other Bethesda products dating all the way back to Daggerfall. I worked on Oblivion, Fallout 3, Fallout 4, Fallout 76, and most recently Starfield. Prior to that, I worked at TSR, the venerable producer and publisher of Dungeons & Dragons. And the thing I'm probably best known for with that is the Ravenloft boxed set Gothic horror campaign setting. So that's kind of my background. At the moment, what I'm doing is I'm a novelist. I produced 2 novels. The third in the series is going to be due out in March. So that is one of 2 shameless plugs that you'll see as we go forward here. So let's get into Radiant Story. The first thing you need to ask is, what exactly were we trying to do? Because the words Radiant Story in and of themselves, they don't really mean anything. So before we can understand what that is, we need to understand what it is we were aiming for that eventually became something Todd made as a talking point for Skyrim. And this is one of those rare cases where we really and truly did have a napkin drawing. This is actually the drawing Todd gave us. Todd Howard started with the person in the middle who represents the player and said in the early games, the player went around and interacted with the environment, but he didn't change it. And then the player actually started to be able to change things in the environment in later games. And that's the various symbols that you see around the edge representing other people and locations. And what he wanted to do was expand that and have the environment actually understand itself, the connections to itself, and have the environment actually make changes in response to player actions that weren't necessarily directly the thing the player was changing. Basically, we wanted to make the world feel more responsive. We wanted to make the game feel like it was alive, like it understood that you were there and that you were part of it. And when you acknowledged the world, it acknowledged you back. As a small part of this, it was also a way for us to be able to create faction job quests, things that the game gave you as small little quests, but we wanted to have them feel more meaningful, feel more real, and be able to create them dynamically rather than just have a set of fixed quests that were things that would constantly repeat. So, and this is one of the big ones, adapting to the player's situation. So the game needed to understand the player and not just have the player understand the game. So if the player was wounded, the game needed to understand that and address him accordingly. If the player's casting spells, it needed to understand that. If the player had a lot of money, it needed to understand that. And at a deeper level than just saying, "Ooh, you have a lot of money," we'll throw out a line from an NPC saying, "Boy, you look rich." And this actually turned out to be the key thing. We didn't know it at the time, but we needed and wanted to allow NPCs to change roles so that if something happened to an NPC, say you did a quest for someone and they were a shopkeeper, and in the course of that quest, they end up becoming the long lost prince and they go live in the palace. Well, somebody else needed to become that shopkeeper. So we wanted to be able to have NPCs change the actual role they played in the game to allow us to have quests that were more dynamic and to allow the world to feel like it was actually going to change as things happened, as the player interacted with it. So we had all these high ideals, and we had to ask ourselves, what exactly does that mean? And the following is a conversation that actually happened between Todd and I. So we were presenting this to him and saying, this is what we think would be really exciting to do for an implementation of your little napkin drawing. And his response was, I like that responsive thing. Can you give me some examples? So when I kill a guy, his family will come after me. And there's a lot to, yes, that's the classic one, isn't it? But there's a lot to unpack in this. So the game has to know that I killed the guy. Well, that's probably the easy part. It has to understand what his family is, and it has to be able to find the player in the game somewhere and do something about it. So I was really excited by this example. And then Todd said, give me some examples that are about killing someone. And my response was, I didn't have any. And since killing things is what a lot of games are about, and were definitely about back then, that was a real problem. We needed something that was a lot deeper. So he sent us back to the drawing board. When I say us, it was Kurt Coleman and I. Kurt was my partner in crime in coming up with Radiant's story. And so we needed to have a deeper dive into this. And so we came up with a concept of events. And this isn't a new concept. It's been around in computer programming for a long time. But these are the events that we thought the game could register as, hey, that happened, and then that we could trap or acknowledge and have the software do something about. And this is the full list of things we came up with. And that's a pretty good list of things, actually. And if you look through here, you see the easy ones. You attack somebody, or you kill someone, or murder them. Murder being distinguished from kill because it's a crime to have killed that person, as opposed to not a crime to kill that person. There's a lot of non-crime killing that goes on in video games, unfortunately. But even simple things like dropping items, changing location, meaning you go to a new place, try to bribe an NPC, pick a lock, befriend someone, discover a corpse. All of these things were things that we said, if the game knows it happened, we can have the game react to the fact it happened. And Todd was pretty happy with this list. This was a pretty good list, and he looked this over and he went, that looks fantastic. Let's go ahead and proceed with putting this into Skyrim. And this was a very big development project, so there was a lot of effort put into making all this happen. And this is the part that's going to get a little bit technical for those of you who are more on the dev side. So we had to create something called an event in our creation kit. Now I'm going to apologize for the next few slides. These events are all from Fallout 4 because I didn't actually capture the event window objects from the Skyrim editor. It was a lot easier for me to grab from the Fallout editor. But the principle is exactly the same. So what we have here is event is a new type. And if you look on the left-hand side, you'll see SM node event down just above the items category. And in that, there are all these event types that we have. Now, the Fallout list, we're looking at things like iron sights being pulled up or hacking computers. Obviously, that wasn't in Skyrim. But all the things that you saw on the previous slide, those were events that we had in here. Those were things that we put breakpoints in the code such that when it happened, it would send a signal to this event so that we could do something about it. And this is what the event node looks like in the Fallout 4 editor. So what you see there in the main window up top are the branch nodes. So when an event comes in, it starts going down through this stack and looking for a match. I'm an event type. Do I match this? Do I not? And we added to that the things that you see in the larger block at the bottom on the right, where not only does it have to match the event type, it also has to satisfy all these conditions. So if you look at the condition list at the bottom, it says get event data, new location. That means, did we change location? Did we get to the good neighbor location? But if that's not good enough, it also had to say, were these other things true? Did this one quest stage happen to get triggered? Was this scene, has it been run? So we would have multiple things going on within a node. It wasn't good enough to know where the location changed. We might have 20 things under that, and we wanted to be able to say, this is the specific instance we're looking at. And when all this happened, when all this stuff is true, it would start a quest. Now, we had to kind of redefine what quest meant. In the old days, quest was always a big thing that the player did. Now, a quest was any interaction that we want actors or objects in the world to perform. So quest took on a much more broad definition. So let's look at some examples. Example event quests, things that these trapped events might generate. So the player learns a spell. This spell is an event. It goes into the story manager. The story manager starts comparing it to all the things in that list, finally finds one that matches, you've learned a spell, and it starts a quest. And the quest finds an actor in the world that is a wizard, or maybe creates one, sends that person to that NPC to the player, and the player will force greet it. The NPC will force greet the player and say, hey, can you teach me a spell? All because you learned a spell. The player buys an item. So now it will find an NPC in the area, and that NPC will go to the player and says, hey, that item was stolen from me. You need to give it back to me. And that's the little quest that was given. Notice in both of these cases, it's triggered by something the player does. So the game is being responsive to the player and understands that the player is interacting with the world and interacts back. Player makes a potion, NPC comes and asks you to make a healing potion for them. Now this is one that gets triggered in Riverwood a lot. The dragon gets killed there, and everybody in Riverwood comes around and gawks at the dragon having been killed. So we'll explore that particular one in more detail a little later. The player steals an item. Thugs from the Thieves Guild, or just thugs in general, hunt down the player and demand the item. So if you look at all these things, they make the game feel alive. They make the game feel like you are actually interacting with it, and it isn't just background against which you perform the things you do as a player. And for the time, that was pretty revolutionary. You see a lot of this stuff in games these days, but at the time, very few games tried to do anything like this. So let's look at how we actually built our Radiant stories. In order to create them, we needed to have a much deeper understanding of the world. Prior to this, we didn't understand that a chest belonged to a dungeon. In fact, there was no understanding of what a dungeon itself was. That didn't exist as an object type in the game. It was just a bunch of places, a bunch of objects the player could walk on, and there were chests and monsters in there, but we didn't understand the concept of dungeon in a way that we could attach to it. So we needed to create new object types for locations and for character relationships. And we needed to create what we call location reference types for the bosses and boss chests and captives and quest objects, etc. So I'll pause here and I'll give you an example. So in our game, a cell is a space on the map, and it's a rectangle, or a square rather, and in that there may be a door to some place. And that door, when you open it, leads into what you would think of as a dungeon, but for us it's another cell. So that cell now had an object type attached to it called a location, and that square where the doorway was also had that location attached to it. So when we say to the program, find me this location, it knew that that meant either the square with the door entrance or the cell that had the contains all the interiors. And then inside that cell, we would mark the bosses and say, this monster is the boss, in such a way that we can find him later. This chest is where the boss chest is. This marker is where a captive could be placed. This marker is where objects for the quest can be placed. And every dungeon had all of those. And then we would assign keywords. And keywords turned out to be a very, very powerful thing. And they've been around in computer programming for a long time. We certainly did not invent them. But this allowed us to describe these things. So, for example, a dungeon type would be a bandit dungeon, or it could be an animal cave, or it could be a place where a dragon priest is. So these allowed us to define what kinds of things within the locations they applied to. And this was the biggest one, an alias system for quests. And I'm going to get into that in much more detail. But basically what it was saying is that every actor in the world, every NPC, they are not anything by themselves. They are pushed into an alias, and the alias holds all the data. The actual actor no longer holds it. And this was very powerful because we could swap things out of those alias by putting different NPCs into them, and we could create them on the fly and collapse them on the fly. And last but not least were the events in a story manager. And I've kind of already covered that. That was our way to know that something has happened and then to spin up a quest because of it. So let's look for a moment at the implementation. This is what a location object looks like in the Fallout 4 editor once again. So you can see this is for the Beacon Hill Apartments in the upper left-hand corner there. And one of the report types that we had is, these are all the things that are within that location. So I can see at a glance that there's a captive marker, there's a map marker ref type, there's a boss container, and then there's a bunch of other X markers that we use for something special there. And in the lower left-hand corner, you can see there's keywords. So this is a place where raiders could be. So we attach that keyword. This was a clearable place, which meant that you were able to make sure that new creatures didn't respawn in it until certain conditions were selected. And there's a bunch of other miscellaneous data that I won't go into here, but this turned out to be very, very powerful for us because we could define what a place was. And here are a few other of the creation kit implementation objects. Location ref type, those turned out to be very simple. You just needed an ID, and we could attach something to it to say, this type of location is for railroad agents in this particular case. Keywords were also highly generic. So every actor had a type. They'd be a type by their race, they'd be a type by their voice type, they'd be a type by the job that they potentially could carry. And so an actor would have multiple keywords to help us understand what kind of an actor it was. And then most interesting for us at the time was the relationships. So we could say, this actor has a relationship to these other actors, and this is the nature of the relationship. So we'd be able to find relatives. We'd be able to find someone who was your boss or your apprentice. We'd be able to find someone who was nobility, things like that. Let's talk more deeply about aliases, because they turned out to be one of the really big wins for us. So, an alias contains all the information about what an actor will or won't do in a particular situation. So a shopkeeper alias contains all the dialogue and contains all of the actions, the paths they'll walk, the places they'll stand, things like that, for the shopkeeper. And then you attach the actor to the alias. That means if something happens to that actor, to that NPC, you can put somebody new in there. And this ended up being extremely powerful for us. So the aliases all get filled when the quest starts. Now for things like your typical shopkeepers in your cities, the game started with those aliases and those quests that were running them filled. So we had quests that represented the entire city. and they would start filled. But for other quests, say a let's go kill the wolf quest, I know this is the most exciting type to run. When the quest spins up, it goes and finds an actor and can stuff him into the alias, and suddenly there's new things that actor can say. It goes and finds objects in the world and says, this is the thing you have to seek. It can go find a location in the world and it says, this is where I'm going to go seek that object. And this allows us to do some of the randomization that you see in Skyrim. Aliases then hold that data and then is released when the quest completes. And the programmers love this part because programmers hate having extraneous data laying around. When extra data lays around, it creates complications for things. It fills up space that could be otherwise used for more fun things. So being able to release it turned out to be very key on their side. So the reference alias window is actually too big to display in one screen here. So I've got the top half here, and the next slide will show you the bottom half. But there's a lot of data here. I won't try to unpack all of it because that would probably take an entire hour. But there's a few things that I wanted to show you so that you can understand it. So if you look in the upper right, we had all of these tags that we could set to a particular alias. Okay, so for example, you see reserves there a couple places. That meant that if an NPC was in this alias, he wasn't allowed to be in any other alias. So if he's doing this activity that this alias is attached to, can't do anything else, you got to find somebody else if your quest is coming looking for someone. And then you can see the two check boxes are allow dead or allow disabled. So this means that this reference could be attached to a dead body or one that is not visible in the game right now. And then you can read the rest of them on your own and see all the different kinds of things that they could be. And then you come over to the fill type, and there's a number of different ways you can fill a reference. You can either force it to be something specific or a unique actor, in this case, Paladin Dance, or more interesting, you can say, go to a location and find a guy who's a particular ref type, say the boss, and put him in this. You can also create a reference, and this was also another one that turned out to be very powerful. Let's create a monster. So nothing ever existed before, so we're going to create it either in a particular location or at a particular marker that we might have created. So this allowed us to create things on the fly and then get rid of them once we no longer needed them. And then on the right there, you can see we can attach scripts to it. Finding matching reference, the last of the fill types here, we could go throughout the world and look for something that fit the criteria, and we even had a set of generic conditions that we could attach to it. And then once the alias was filled, if you look down at the bottom, we could add factions, add spells, add other keywords that would be useful, and add packages. Packages were our way of having actors move around in the world. Now I'm going to show you the bottom of this one. So you can see just a little bit extra on the bottom. And we could add objects to its inventory, and we could do a bunch of other fancy stuff that is there on the bottom right. So these are all the things that would be added to an actor once they have been put into an alias. Okay, let's go back and look at some sample world interactions, knowing what we now know about locations, aliases, and keywords. So we're going to create one. So here's the event. Player drops an item. Here's a representative example. Player drops the Mace of Molag Bal. Why the player would ever do that? I don't know. Let's assume they decide to drop the Mace of Molag Bal. Well, as game designers, we decided if you drop any of the artifacts, this is just a representative example, something should happen. People on the street shouldn't just walk by that like, oh yeah, there's a Mace of Molag Bal. You know, it's no different than a paper cup that might be dropped in the as trash. So the event is player drops item. The item type is any one of the Daedric artifacts. A quest spins up. Aliases are created for the item. We do a find matching for aliases that are bystanders and a nearby guard. So people walking around in the city or the town where we might be, and for a guard nearby. So if you drop it in the wilderness, this quest would fail because those aliases couldn't get filled. And that's fine. You drop the Mesa Mullig ball on some mountaintop, nobody's going to react to it. So this really only applies to cities and towns. So 2 nearby bystanders are required, but there's some optional ones. If there's more people around, we can fill them. And the guard also is optional. So maybe there's a guard, maybe there isn't, maybe there's more bystanders, maybe there isn't. But if there aren't at least 2 bystanders, the quest the aliases will not fill and the quest fails. The required bystanders begin to argue over the dropped item. Oh, he doesn't want it, that's mine. Oh, he doesn't want it, that's mine. So they start arguing with each other. The other NPCs, if they're available, will cheer on the ensuing fight. And whoops, didn't put that down there. And last but not least, the guard will get involved and try to break up the fight. So once again, this is an example of the player does something unusual and the world reacts in a way that feels natural. Just dropping all your loot in the middle of the city street, that shouldn't be a nothing has happened event. So something happens, the world reacts to it, and the world feels more alive and real to you because of it. Now, we were really excited as all this got going and everything started to develop and things were looking absolutely fantastic for us. And the inevitable happens. You push a system just a little bit too far. So this is an actual quote from Todd Howard. He's not happy with this quote. He said it, so he's got to actually live with it. What if the entire main quest was a Radiant story? And in his head, and to be fair, in mine as well, he was seeing an entirely dynamic world that was totally responsive to the player, and that sounds really exciting in your head. And of course, he took his little kayak and he went off the waterfall there. And as a good little employee, I followed along right with him. Or maybe we'll just make the companions nothing but Radiant quests, because we were actually having staffing issues and didn't really have a quest designer to do the companions to the level we wanted them to be. The lesson that we learned from this is that going too far is necessary. You have to push yourself, you have to push these systems, and you don't know if you've gotten the maximum out of it until you have made that step too far. And fortunately, in less than 24 hours, I think actually later that same day, both Todd and I realized, yeah, we went too far. Neither of these are good ideas. In fact, they're really, really bad ideas. And so we stopped ourselves. The key, of course, is knowing when you've gone too far. Because if you don't recognize that, you're going to be in real trouble. You're going to have some serious issues. So, having backed ourselves off of that precipice, we started to implement all of this. And we had a new lesson. The road to Sovngarde is paved with good intentions. So, of course, Sovngarde is where people go, not those other places that you hear about. Initially, many of the Radiant quests felt very mechanical. And this wasn't good. We were getting playtest results that said, you know, I'm really feeling that this is just got the serial numbers filed off of it, and it doesn't feel like it's fun. It feels like it's just something where I'm going through the paces. Things were very, very repetitive. Somebody would get the same quest 3 times in a row, and that's bad. That's not good. And there were too many bizarre combinations. One of my favorites was some farmer who wanted you to kill the skeever in the city on the other side of the entire world. It's like, what? Why does this guy care about skeevers all the way in Markarth when he's hanging out over here in Windhelm? It just doesn't make sense. And this goes back to the quest feeling mechanical. Players don't want job quests. Yeah, we put some in there so that they do fill a role, but that's not the heart and soul of a game, and we were making too many of them. So we had to make some course corrections. We had to say, how are we going to fix these things? And we fixed them by limiting job quests to NPCs that feel right for them. Because initially, we had virtually every NPC could give you a job quest. You know, heck, NPCs are all over the world. Why shouldn't they all have something they want done? Well, that feels like you're bombarding the player with meaningless things to do. So, where do job quests feel appropriate? They felt appropriate in the guilds. Where else did they feel appropriate? They feel appropriate with the innkeepers. And so, largely, those are the places where you end up finding these job quests. The, hey, go do this random thing for me. So, if as a player, you want to do that because you want to just do something small to get a little bit of extra skill bump so you can get that next level without starting something big, you know where you can go to. It's a place that feels natural and feels right. And this turned out to be a big thing for us. We wrote custom lines for different voice types or NPCs. So what we did is we assigned all the NPCs voice types based on a personality. So we had grumpy old man, we had eager young woman, we had things like that. And because we were attaching personality to the voice types, we would write a completely different approach in the same quest for that. Grumpy old man would talk about, those damn wolves, kind of like get off my lawn kind of an approach. And the eager young woman would talk about how, oh, please don't hurt them, but I understand if you might have to. And so it felt very personal to those people. And so even though you're doing the same thing, it didn't feel quite as repetitive. And this turned out to be the number one thing we had to do. We had to really clamp down on the conditions to limit the quests. If a farmer wanted you to kill the animals that were interfering with his livelihood, that had to happen nearby. And it had to happen for animals that felt right. No going out there and having to kill the level 60 troll or anything silly like that. So we really clamped down on the conditions. That meant far fewer quests spawned, but the ones that did, they felt right. So lessons learned here. And something interesting as a side note, by the way, this fun little object actually exists in the real world. And by sheer coincidence, I walked into a store in Switzerland and I saw it sitting in a display. So if you want to own one of these, the time I saw it was about $400. I'm sure it's triple that price now. You can actually own this thing that you see on the screen in front of you. So, lessons learned. Radiant Story is a tool. It's a way to get things done. It is not an end unto itself. It is a means to an end. And once we understood that, we realized you use it where you need it and you don't use it where you don't need it. Don't try and pound that square peg into that round hole. It's an extremely powerful tool, but it is not an end-all be-all. People want stories. They don't want algorithms. This was something that we walked ourselves down a primrose path of, and we had to walk back. Just because we can make an algorithmic story doesn't mean it's a good one. By the way, these days, the algorithms are getting really good, and they actually are writing stories. But at the time we did Skyrim, that wasn't true. Another lesson learned. You have to play your game with an unflinchingly critical eye. We needed to look at the game, and we need to acknowledge the things that we were doing wrong. If you get caught up in your own hype, if you convince yourself of your own genius, you're not going to be able to fix things when they go wrong. And that's something we needed to do. Unfortunately, Bethesda happens to be particularly good at that. And you need to be willing to make significant changes. You cannot say to yourself, oh, but I love this little thing and it's in the game and it'll be so much work to take it out or to change it. Wrong. If it has to be changed, it has to be changed, and you need to have the willpower to actually do that. So, this is the second shameless plug for my novel. We will go into questions and answers. However, because I'm using the free version of Zoom, my meeting timer has 4 minutes and 35 seconds left on it. So I'm going to exit this Zoom session, start up another one immediately. And Alex, who has been a wonderful helper, is going to start that up for us. So I will see you all in about 30 seconds, hopefully.
All right, thank you, everyone. I don't know what's going on with the lights. I came prepared for network issues, and the room has, well, it has managed to surprise me. If you have questions, please come up here. Otherwise, thank you for coming, and enjoy your MAGFest.
Okay. You got audio, Alex?
Am I facing it right?
I'm not hearing you,
Right, there you
Alex.
All right, quiet, please. We are beginning the Q&A session.
I'm still not hearing anything.
Can't believe I'm first. Hi. So I had 2 quick questions. One, will these slides be, I guess, available elsewhere? Or will they be available after the...
I can't hear that at all.
One sec.
I'm hearing you now. I wasn't hearing you before, so that's good news.
All right, I guess I have 2 quick questions. Will these slides be available elsewhere, or after the event?
I'm sorry, there was enough breakup in that. I'm going to ask Alex to rephrase the question for me so I can understand it.
That's fine. So the question is, will the slides be available somewhere?
I can make the slides available. I meant to start a recording of this. I did not. I don't know if Alex has another recording, but I'm certainly willing to make the slides available to you guys.
Perfect, thank you. And second, a lot of people complained that Skyrim itself, a lot of the quests and a lot of the story was a bit shallow. Personally, though, I feel you all did an amazing job at creating this the sheer versatility of the world as I see it. I'm curious. Are there I guess with the Elder Scrolls 6 eventually coming out, does Bethesda have any plans for addressing those kinds of criticisms or any kind of changes that they're planning to make?
I'm going to give you 2 answers to that. Answer number 1: I cannot talk about Elder Scrolls 6.
All right.
Yeah, I'm sure you're all shocked, just shocked at that. Answer number 2, of course, we're going to listen to the audience. Of course, we're going to listen to our fans, and we are going to pay attention to all the things that you tell us, the good and the bad, and we will do what we can within our ability in terms of budget, time, resources, etc., to make the best game that they can. So those are my 2 answers.
All right, then. Thank you.
Good afternoon. When you were developing Skyrim in the Radiant system, how did you balance the need for so many objects and actors to be listening for these events with the need to optimize performance and make sure that the data was being processed at a reasonable rate?
Well, a lot of that actually fell onto the event system. Some events we were told we were not allowed to have. For example, in the Fallout system, we were not allowed to have an event for every bullet that hits, because that would just overwhelm the system. That was not allowed. It was allowed in the Skyrim system because that doesn't happen nearly as frequently. You don't have machine guns spraying 10 bullets a second out there. So events that would spam the event system, the programmers said no, and we tried to talk them out of it, and they said no louder. So nothing has to be processed until an event starts. Once the event starts, the other thing that we were told, and this was easy for us to accept, was that the quest is not going to spin up the same frame the event happens. The quest might not start up for several seconds because we're going to smear out all that processing over multiple frames so that we don't bog the system down. And the other thing that we made as a promise to the developers or to the programmers is that when we ask for an object, we won't make it search through too many things. We will make sure to put sufficient conditions on there that it can limit the set of objects that it has to search through and identify. Because you have to pay attention to performance.
Awesome, thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Hey there, good afternoon. So to kind of go along with this, I remember a long time ago there had been this kind of sort of story about how, going back to Oblivion, which is still my favorite one, so thanks for working on that. A lot of what you said also sounds like a lot of the things that they had talked about, how like the beta for like how NPCs originally acted in Oblivion was apparently so strong at point where you gave tasks to NPCs, and they were practically playing the game themselves in Oblivion. So how much of that came from Oblivion into Skyrim with the Radiant system, if that question makes sense? Was there a progression?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And you can go back way further than that. The very first Elder Scrolls game was Arena, and things that the programmers back then dreamed about made their way into Daggerfall, and then new advancements made their way to Morrowind, and then Oblivion, and then Skyrim. Fortunately, when you have a franchise that goes into multiple sequels like this, you can continue to build upon the things that you did in the past, and absolutely things that we had in not just Oblivion, but also in Fallout 3, we were able to carry forward into Skyrim.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My question is, so when you were developing this Radiant world that was responsive to the players' status and what they were doing, were there any bizarre confrontations that you left in for the fun of it? Because one that I often think of that always makes me chuckle a little bit is when I'm running through Skyrim as this hulked out werewolf, and a thief will stop me in the middle of my rampage to tell me to hand over my gold. And I'm like, I can maul your face off. What are you doing? Was anything like that left in just for the fun of it?
No. There were things that were funny that were left in. For example, when a giant hits you with its club and you go flying, that was an accidental setting of the kinetic energy that is imparted to you or to any actor when they are killed. It's supposed to just knock you over. I don't remember if it was an artist or a designer, but somebody put an extra 0 on the end of that accidentally. And Todd saw that and said, "We're shipping with it that way. That is going, we're shipping that."
Thank you.
It's too much fun. But when it came to the Radiant system, we were scrambling to find all the weirdnesses and stamp them out. We were playing whack-a-mole with all the bizarre combinations, and the ones that ended up in there were things that we just ran out of time or didn't hit our radar in the course of development. So we do like to do those kinds of things, but the Radiant system, it wasn't felt like that was the right place for that kind of humor.
Understandable. Thank you.
Hello. So my question concerns how the Radiant system has carried forward post Skyrim. Obviously, it's been utilized in all Bethesda games following, because of its adaptability and usefulness for all of these kind of quest scenarios. What were some of the biggest technical challenges when you brought it to the scale of something like Fallout 4, where now you have these Radiant settlements and the different quests that can occur there, and then even the bigger technical challenge of bringing it into 76, where there's now multiple players who have Radiant systems interacting around them?
The Radiant system actually isn't used much in 76. Being a multiplayer environment, you have other human beings that can provide a lot of what the NPCs were providing in Fallout 4 and in Skyrim. So while aspects of it, like aliases and keywords and locations, ended up being used, the actual event management system was thinly used, if at all, for 76. That game had very different needs. In terms of, I'm sorry, I'm going to ask you to repeat the first part of your question. I got focused on 76 there.
Technical challenges bringing it into Fallout 4 with the expansions of the settlement system.
There were definitely some. There were also philosophical differences. For example, Emil Pagliarulo, who's the lead designer for Fallout, he did not like the whole package system where the vendors would go to sleep at night and then come back out to their shops. He felt that was frustrating to the players. I can't say that he's wrong. So those shopkeepers ended up always on duty, 24/7. We also didn't have any quests where the shopkeepers, or very, very few at least, would be replaced because he felt that their identities were very important. Probably the biggest change was something that Todd asked for, which is that every NPC got a unique voice. This is one of the things that happened in Fallout 4. And by getting a unique voice, that made it extremely difficult to write unique dialogue for all of them. We could have technically done it, but the burden on the people writing the dialogue and the burden on the actors having to record that dialogue would have been extreme. So as a result, it limited our ability to do certain things that we were able to do in Skyrim in Fallout 4, and the Radiant story system ended up being used differently. In some ways better, in some ways not as flexible.
Thank you.
I often credit Skyrim with being the game that caused me to shift from thinking of video games as a single system to a collection of interworking systems. So you could say I've been looking forward to this presentation for about maybe 10 years. This is related to a question that came up about 5 minutes ago. Do you have a particular favorite bit of emergent interaction that happens in either the Radiant quest system or just in the game in general, such as the story about foxes leading to treasure or the chickens reporting crimes or that sort of thing? Anything like that? Perfect. We almost made it through this one.
There we go. Okay. I remember a situation where we had a quest in this. I am here. I can hear you. Okay, we'll try this again. I remember seeing a quest in Skyrim where someone is being held prisoner and you have to go rescue them. And we didn't put proper conditions on this because the quest also had in it that once you rescue them, they help you fight your way through the rest of the dungeon. So we had a little old lady who had no weapons get rescued. And not only did she decide to help you fight the rest of the monsters of the dungeon, she went and collected a battle axe from a nearby chest and ran rampant through that dungeon, killing everything in sight because she couldn't be killed because we made her essential, because she was needed for the story. So we had to change the conditions on that quest, but for a little while there, it was pretty hilarious seeing the kinds of people that ended up being taken prisoner and going and finding really obscene weapons and having at it with the Draugr.
Excellent.
Hey, so for the most part, for the examples given of the Radiant system, they're kind of like self-contained little standalone little stories. So, and also you touched on in passing about how players desire written stories over algorithms. So in an intentionally written story, such as a main storyline, how and to what capacity do you see the Radiant system being used as a tool to improve or supplement those intentionally written stories?
Even for stories that are intentionally written, there is a power available to us through the Radiant story system, the things that we could do with aliases and locations and things like that. For example, it allowed us to build a story shell and have the dungeon be built afterward. because all we were doing is looking for where's the boss and where's the boss chest. And so the developers who are working on the dungeon, who are building it, they could just change things on the fly out from underneath us, and we didn't have to rebuild the quest as a result. So the flexibility that gave us, even in specific stories, was just tremendous. Or if we were testing a quest and it turned out, that story's just not working well for us. Okay, well, fixing it turned out to be way easier because all the pieces were compartmentalized in ways that we could take advantage of. So it became a very powerful tool. And even in games where we didn't use the Radiant story system as much, the alias system and locations and all those other object types have been very, very powerful.
Yeah, that thoroughly answers my question. Thank you.
Hello, my question pertains to the kind of alias system. I'm just wondering, in the circumstance you described where you're assigning an alias to an existing actor, is it possible for an actor to have multiple aliases? And if so, how does that work? Does one kind of stack on top of the other and override it for the time? Or is there any kind of concept of like mutually exclusive, you don't want somebody to be the shopkeeper of two shops, for example?
In fact, most actors in Skyrim and in Fallout belong to multiple aliases.
Yeah.
And just as a very, very minor point, actors are assigned to aliases, not the other way around. Although I suppose in one sense that's technical. One of the things I pointed out was the reserve system. So you could have an actor, when he gets into an alias, he is now reserved. And any other quest that wants to get him, they cannot. He is reserved for that. And you can also allow reserved. So we had ways to segment it.
Okay.
In terms of the stacking, every quest had a priority. It wasn't on the screens that I showed you. It's on the quest screens. The priority is just a value from 1 to 100. And when the software is looking for a line to say or a package to offer or anything else, it always takes the highest priority quest first and stops there. So, for example, the quests that run the cities are at very, very low priority. So they form the base level of, hello, how are you doing? Things you greet people in the street. The miscellaneous quests will be a step above that, and the main story and guild quests were at the very top, always being dominant over everything else that was happening.
Awesome, appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
Good afternoon. I'm interested if you have any thoughts on how new software engineering principles and tools like machine learning could be applied to something like the Radiant system.
The machine learning is stuff that I would dearly love to see video gaming get into. The problem is the overhead involved in having that be inside your game is pretty high. Now, and I'm struggling to remember the name of it, but the game that had the villain system actually did some of that. So yeah, Shadow Ward. Thank you. And that allowed the player to define who the big enemies were, because as you went through the game and you ended up defeating these guys, the people you defeated would then become better enemies later on. That's a good example, I think, of machine learning. For the games that we were making, we were not really in a position to apply any of that, but I would dearly love to see the industry do more. But I think there's some really cool things you can do, like Shadow of War did.
Thank you.
Shadow of Mordor, excuse me.
Hey there. This is going to sound like a weird question in regards to just Skyrim, so you don't have to talk about things you're not allowed to talk about. At the time you were making Skyrim, were there any particular, besides the story and things going overboard, were there any particular weaknesses at the time that for the Radiant story system that really kind of you guys had to step in manually in other ways besides bizarre quest combinations or things like that? Was there any way that was underwhelming?
Most of the underwhelming stuff is when we tried to over-apply it. For a brief time, some of the guild quests and the main quest would randomly seek out a dungeon or an actor to fill a particular role. And what we found is that in play tests, inevitably, one player would get an underwhelming experience because the location or the actor chosen to fill that role just wasn't as exciting. Somebody else might get one that was like, holy cow, I can't even get through this. Why'd you guys pick this? And so all the locations that you see in the main quest, for example, they're all custom locations. All the actors are custom actors built for that so that the experience is common and is managed. So we did have underwhelming things happen that way.
Okay, thanks.
Hi. One thing I wanted to know about like building the game and like the story system and all the different variables you guys assigned to the actors is, was there any like intention while you were making it to make it more accessible for anyone who would want to like mod the game and add their own like custom NPC or custom location or something?
Not really, no. Our approach to modders is to basically give them the exact same tool we use to develop the game. So if you download our editor, the creation kit from our website, you are actually using the exact same tool we use. But it's hard enough to make our own tools do what we needed them to do without also having to worry about what the mod community might need. So instead, we just gave them everything. Here, have it all. This is everything we used. You could literally remake all of Skyrim or Fallout or whatever it might be with the tools we provide for you.
Thank you.
I guess I had one other quick question. I guess for all the other software students or anyone in software like who's also curious, I was wondering what kind of data structures do you use to like store and access this information efficiently?
You're actually looking at it. Because this game system started way back in the Oblivion days, it's actually kind of dated. Using something like a relational database would be more modern, but it's actually all flat file data, and it is accessed by the tools that we provide online. Literally, there's one tool. It is the creation kit, and everything is accessed in there. And then there's a handful of flat files that hold all of the data. Many of them get close to the 2 gigabyte limit for a file size. The artists, they have a few extra external tools that they use for managing and displaying data, but I lived my life for years inside the creation kit tool. That is how we do it.
That's fair. Thank you.
Going back to someone brought up modding. I don't know how much you pay attention to the modding scene, but is there any in particular standout mods that, like when they used the Radiant system, that when you guys saw it kind of maybe blew your mind as seeing what other people were doing with your game in particular?
I can't speak to the Radiant story system for that so much, but in general, we see mods all the time that blow our minds. Many of them use the code extenders and script extenders because that gives them a lot of extra power. But it's stunning what some of the things the mod community have done. We look at it, we just shake our heads and say, how the hell did they do that? And then we look into it and go, oh, that's how they do it. Well, we can't afford to do that. Okay, so have fun.
Thank you.
Okay, Bruce, I think that's all the questions.
Thank you very much. You've been a wonderful audience. I hope MAGFest treats you to an amazing experience. It's been wonderful talking to you, and thank you very much, Alex, for all the help.